Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Clary, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about ethics in the criminal justice system. Imagine that you are a new police officer, fresh out of the academy, and you're assigned to a training officer, and you stop out to eat lunch. When it's time to go, your training officer waves over to the manager, and the manager says to the waitress, "Hey, they serve and protect us every day. They don't need to pay. We got this." What are the implications of this? What should we do next? Unfortunately, Mike, the Situation Sorrentino, is not here to help us out, so I'm going to do our best to work us through this today. How do we define ethics? Is it right? Is it wrong? Are we taking the correct action or the wrong action? Is it moral or immoral? Is it socially acceptable or socially unacceptable? What does everyone else think? Well, before we had large cities and societies, we were hunter-gatherers. Anthropologically speaking, all people cared about was air, water, food, shelter, security, procreation, and companionship. They didn't really worry so much about how they interacted with each other in large scales. So Greek philosophers decided to tackle this. We have Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. They believed that happiness was virtuous and that the pursuit of happiness was how ethics was defined. Later thoughts was that justice and how society was governed and how everyone acted to each other in society by dividing each other into classes that were economical and efficient. Epicurus, who is not pictured here, he believed that things that were good, that were pleasurable, that was the virtuous and ethical thing, and things that were painful or bad were unethical. Like being hungry. Hungry was bad, so you should eat. And that's today why everyone thinks of Epicurus as a guy who just likes his food and wine. Modern philosophy, we had Immanuel Kant, and he believed there was something called a categorical imperative, which is a maximum that says if it is what you should do, then that is what you should always do. If it is the right thing, just do it. Utilitarianism, that's Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, they were firm believers that the right thing was to do if it had the greatest benefit. That means if something was great for the majority of the people, then that was the right thing to do. Professionalism. I used to be an emergency medical technician, and we had our own kind of standards, codes, New York State. So just like EMTs, law enforcement, doctors, accountants, they have a set of standards, and these standards govern their behavior and their actions. They should be consistent and apply to everyone equally. They should be very well defined. You should know exactly what those standards are, what is on which side of the line. And there should be consequences if you don't follow those standards. And that includes, maybe losing your right to practice medicine or losing your accounting license. Integrity. KPMG, it's one of the large accounting firms in the world, of the big four they call it. They produce a survey every several years. This one was in 2013, and this was about select observations by employees in government and regulatory affairs functions. So they asked employees if they had seen anyone do any of these things in the last 12 months. They've seen a coworker do it, not that they were admitting to do it, because most people aren't going to admit to doing things wrong. So making false or misleading claims to the public or media, 31%. 31% of employees in the government and regulatory affairs positions saw a coworker make a false or misleading claim. Providing inappropriate information to analysts or vendors, 23%. Providing regulators with false or misleading information, 20%. Making improper political contributions to domestic officials, 17%. Doing business with third parties that may be involved in money laundering, 9%. Making improper payments or bribes to foreign officials, 7%. Those are some big numbers. I mean, normally the outliers should be 5% or less, but 31% of making false claims, that's almost a third. That does not define integrity. I'd like to think that the other percentages are defining integrity. And integrity means doing the right thing when no one is looking. So corruption. There is a lot of corruption in the world in different countries. The US does not rate as high as it probably should, but it is better than many other countries where you're paying bribes to pretty much every person you come across. Some examples of corruption that I like to talk about are prescription drugs. Doctors who are given trips or luncheons or golf outings by pharmaceutical companies in order to prescribe their drugs. That's supposed to be illegal, but it happens. Mortgages. A lot of unscrupulous behavior led to the big crash, about 10 years ago, the mortgage market. Investments. When a stockbroker makes more money to steer you into a investment vehicle that has a less favorable return rate than one where the customer would make out better. They're looking out for themselves when they're supposed to be looking out for the customers. Vote buying. It used to be in the state of Kentucky, or Commonwealth of Kentucky rather, that the bars could not open until the polls closed on election day. And that was so back in the 1800s, candidates couldn't go to the bar and buy drinks for everyone to get them to go vote for them. Influence, you see that often with lobbyists trying to pressure congressional officials, giving them donations. And quid pro quo, I do something for you, you do something for me. Anthony Hopkins, of course, in Silence of the Lambs was all about quid pro quo. How do we combat corruption? Well, I like to think that's just a never-ending circle. I mean, training, you have to train people and teach them, hey, you're not supposed to do things like this. You got to have people looking over them and watching to see if someone is doing corrupt acts. And then you have to enforce that. You need to prosecute. You need to fire people. You need to hold people accountable. Or maybe in minor instances, more training. That's why it's a circle. In the criminal justice system, ethical conduct needs a lot of different pieces to come together for it to work. And I think a lot of that starts with recruiting. If you recruit good candidates, you're less likely to have corruption. You need to get the right personalities, people that are doing it because they want to serve the public, not just so that they can try and get themselves into a better position. You need diversity, so you can effectively police the communities you serve. You gotta, minorities, women, education, all of those are factors. Continued training. You need ethics training for all law enforcement. I know that budgets can be strapped sometimes, but a little bit of ethics training to begin with may save a lot of money down the road. And it should be continuous. Just because you got training in the academy doesn't mean new things don't happen. New things occur, new situations. And you need oversight. In a police department, they'll usually have some type of internal affairs division. They're going to investigate, they got to enforce it. And they even sometimes have to prosecute law enforcement officials or politicians or anyone else that serves in a public capacity. And so what are we going to do about this situation? That's a lot of question marks. Because I'm going to be honest, sitting here in this academic setting, creating a presentation, for a paper, for a class, I can absolutely sit here and say, yeah, of course I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to turn down that free meal. I'm going to report the training officer. I'm going to go up the ladder with it to try and prevent things, from happening again like that. But let's get realistic. I'm not in the exact same position. I'd like to think that is what I would do. I would do the proper thing. But if I'm some new 23-year-old college graduate starting a career, I just landed this lucrative job with good pay, benefits, get my 2025 in, retire, go do what I want. Do I want to rock the boat? Do I want to not fit in with the culture? Do I want my training officer possibly giving me bad marks? That's a tough call. It really is. You know, 45 years old, happy with my career, happy with what I'm doing. I'd like to think if I was at my work and something came up, I'd say something. But I can't guarantee that I would, because I'm not in that position. And these are references. I want to thank everyone for listening to me today, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Bye.